Hi everyone, welcome to episode 6 of the Startup Playbook Hustle, a new segment of the podcast where I interview some of the best up-and-coming startups and founders on their journey, lessons, and challenges to date. Before we get into this episode, this will be the very last podcast for 2017. Thank you all for tuning in and for all of the support over the last 18 months. I'll be back in 2 weeks, but this podcast was created for the community, so would love to hear from you on ways that I can make this podcast more valuable and useful for you. Shoot through any feedback or suggestions that you might have to my email at rohit@startupplaybook.co or tweet at me at rohitbhargava7. So coming back to episode 6 of The Hustle, my guest for today's episode is Tony Wu, the co-founder of Weploy, an app which helps businesses with temporary jobs find the right job seekers through online skills matching, cutting out the need for annoying interviews and CV exchanges in the process. Tony took some of the lessons from his previous startup to start Weploy, which in the space of a year has raised over $2 million in funding and has over 20 staff. In this episode, we talk about long-term thinking, Weploy's hiring process, and creating the structures of growth. Without further ado, here is my interview with Tony Wu. Hi Tony, welcome to the Startup Playbook Hustle, and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
So we were just saying this is going to be a good catch-up. Like, we've known each other for quite a while now, but for those people that may not be as familiar with you or your background, do you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
Yeah, so I think we met probably, I want to say about 7 years ago. Has it been that long? Or 5 years
Has it been
ago?
that long? Yeah, it's been a long time.
Crazy time. So basically when we met, I was working at a technology company, but I also had a fashion label startup where basically we were creating bespoke suits, but we wanted to disrupt the bespoke suiting industry because bespoke suits were crazy expensive, and we were like, how do we create high quality suits but at a price point where people could afford? And you were doing stage label at the time. And obviously we got talking. So since then, basically what had happened, I'm just trying to rewind my mind, but Saibu No Akuma grew, and we started with about $150, and it's now there's actually, I'm really happy to say, there's 2 full-timers there working. They're absolutely killing it. I'm still a part of it from a non-daily view, and I try to help as much as I can. But these guys are, they don't really need my help these days. But Saibu really grew, and for me, I was really passionate about growing a business and the brand side of a business and how it operationally works. So for me, I saw Saibu as a really good opportunity to kind of test and create an element of it's almost like a real life CV or lab, right? So during that time, I was I guess experimenting with Saibu, had my day job just to keep the income coming in, and then I got a knock on the door where basically I had an opportunity to join one of the largest recruitment firms. And at the time, I was training jiu-jitsu and getting ready for the World Championships. And where I was working was like about 40 minutes out of the city. And so every morning I'd drive into the city, train jiu-jitsu, go out to this place, work for like 9 hours or whatever it was, and then drive back into the city, train again, and then go home. And it was just totally killing me. So this opportunity to work in the city, but also work in this recruitment industry that I'd always been kind of familiar with or as a job seeker come across with, I was quite interested to see what I could do there, because I'd worked with some really good recruiters in the past, and I'd worked with some really not so good recruiters in the past. And for me, it was like I got this opportunity to really help people's careers and impact their lives. So I took on that role and basically went into this business where I was a cold desk, and I started the not-for-profit business within that business. And when I left, it was a really successful business within there. We had a team working in the business, and it was the first 12 months was really good actually. And I was learning heaps, learning about the going into businesses and understanding how a business wants to get from A to B and how human capital works within that element, and just understanding how recruitment and HR plays within a business and how actually important it is. Post, I guess, like 13 months, I started to get to a point where I just found the whole, not just that company, but the whole industry itself became quite ethically challenging at times, and just what I was doing day to day was not something that I really stood proud about, and it was a slow kind of burn where in the beginning I didn't necessarily want to accept it, but it got to a point where I lived about a block away from it, and in the morning I'd wake up and I'd have to be at work at 8 on the dot, and basically I'd walk around Spencer Street and walk up like Collins Street and like loop my way back to Burke Street, which was literally 1 block away, and rock up late because I just didn't want to be there. And when I looked at it, and I eventually quit to kind of like pursue Saibu No Akuma, and just said, look, you know what, maybe I just do this for a while until I figure what I want to do full time. And when I was reflecting, I was like, I really liked the industry, as in like I liked the human element of it. What I didn't like was what the industry was, and the fact that it just basically been undisrupted and untouched for a long time, and there was just a lot of people who just took advantage of people, basically. We used to get like high fives for throwing out these huge margins, and in the beginning it was like, great, I got this huge commission check, but afterwards it starts to get to a point where it's like, at what cost? So basically I was in this period of limbo where I was pursuing the suit business full time, and I caught up with a friend of mine who at the time owned a restaurant and also a hospitality recruitment business. And we were just having a few beers, kind of talking about the scenario and the situation, and he was giving me the frustration of how come Friday, Saturday, he'd become his biggest client. His waiters and bussies would call in sick. He'd have to go in and basically try to backfill. And like within even his own business, his reception had called in sick, or all this sort of stuff. And we were just joking around about like, oh, we should just build an app or build a platform and solve the problem. And that was that. Like we didn't really explore it that much more, but post that night, we kind of, I had all this time on my hand because I was basically running this other business, which was kind of self-sustaining in itself. And this idea just kept like flying in my head and just like kept turning and turning and turning. And I was like, actually, I need to pursue this. This is something much more interesting. And so drew out these really crappy wireframes on a piece of paper, presented it back to him, and was like, hey, what do you reckon? We talked about that idea. What'd you think? And he loved it. He's like, I'll sell my business now. Let's do this. This is what we have to follow. He then said like he realized that this was not just a national play, it was an international play, and there was 2 ways we could do it. We could either bootstrap it or go and find investment. So in this case, we opted for investment. Brought on a third partner who, funnily enough, during the wireframes, he thought it was a real app, and he was trying to order 4 warehouse people that had called in sick that day, and he's like, oh, your app doesn't work. And we're like, no, it's just the wireframe, which was cool, but it instantly made him go, all right, yes, this is a problem, I can relate to it, I'm in. And then he introduced us to an investor. So we basically hijacked this dinner. We pitched over this dinner and got his interest, got a significant interest, wasn't closed yet. And then Vince basically said, the deal's almost done. I know what I need to do. Leave it with me. Went radio silent for about like a week. And then what we found out this a little bit later, but he'd basically did his research, found out the flight that he was on, and then booked himself a business class flight to sit on the plane. He got it almost right. There was one person that sat next to him and wouldn't swap seats with him. So basically for like 6 hours, he leant over this guy and just like closed the deal, made sure our investor understood it, and was like, and 6 hours in, investor turned around and goes, yep, all right, cool. Sit back down. We're good. Let's get going. So that was about just over a year ago, and then we launched the business, and we kicked off. Started with 3 of us. We had about 400 grand in the bank. We then took a late seed of $1 million. Earlier this year, we received another $1 million. We're up to about 24 employees now across Victoria and Sydney, and it's been a phenomenal year to date. So that's a little bit about, I guess, my background to now.
Yeah. Obviously, absolutely amazing what you guys have achieved in such a short time period as well. But just going back, one of the things that I see crop up time and time again is people finding it so hard to attract other people to their business. So whether that's like, especially co-founders, it sounded like things were super organic and people just seemed to get the idea and be willing to go all in, like booking a business class flight to close the deal. Like, love the hustle with that. I guess what were some of the approaches that you took, or what was kind of different in this situation, or that you feel that you do to help attract the right people to the business?
Yeah, it's we get this question a lot because obviously we've been able to attract some pretty strong talent over the past year. Honestly, like, we don't do anything. I mean, it helps the fact that like we understand recruitment, right? So it makes it a little bit easier. But honestly, all it is that when we go and speak to these people, we're not trying to sell them anything. At no point do I sit there and sell them this dream or anything like that. All it is we tell them about why we're doing this, and why it's important to us. And each person that we've spoken to and brought onto the team have been able to relate to the problem or to the why that we're trying to chase and the why that we're creating this. So when we've been able to explain it to them, they've got it. And when they got it, and we're speaking to them in a passionate way. I mean, myself, Nick, and Vince, we're all super passionate about what we're creating. I think that kind of comes through. And so sometimes, you know, when the deal gets done or when the contract gets signed, we kind of turn around and go, can't believe we got that person, you know. But it's one of those things where like-minded people want to work with like-minded people, right? And you want to solve a problem together. And for us, I think when I look at this team, you know, and often, you know, I'm obviously, if I'm here, it's like I'm in the limelight. But the reality is it's the team. I'm just here talking, but the team are fighting every day to create something amazing. And when I look at each person in our team, each single person is like super passionate about what we're creating, and like I've seen arguments unfold in front of me where you know, the most, you know, junior person in our team is arguing with a senior person about a product feature because of a belief, you know, and that's super important because they're not just there as a job going, yes, this is what I would do, you know, blah blah blah. They're looking at it and going, no, this won't work because of these reasons, and I think that kind of expands across, you know, when we're talking to people and when they meet the rest of the team, they kind of get to see that, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. But for anyone listening at home, if you haven't listened to it already, check out Simon Sinek's Start With Why TED Talk, which is amazing.
Changed my life.
Absolutely. Same for me, like one of the most amazing TED Talks out there. But just what you kind of touched on in terms of, you know, developing a culture where you know, everything is open and people are willing to challenge and people are willing to put their views out there. It's super difficult, especially in a time period where you've you know, grown so quickly and gotten to 24 people. And I think we were talking just before we kind of broke the mic, almost tripling your kind of headcount in a few weeks as well. Yeah. You know, how do you create a culture when things are moving so quickly to, you know, spread that across? Obviously with the co-founders, it makes sense. Yeah, sure. It's your idea, your belief and all of those things. How do you instill that into people that are new to the business or just joining on as you grow? Yeah,
it's hard. And the thing is, we've gone through, you know, quite an accelerated growth in a short amount of time. So it's not like, you know, we when we first started, I created a set of values and you know, an old mission statement. And we've redone that with the rest of the team. And it's happened because we need to be proactive about it. You know, I was actually speaking to someone recently, and we're talking about how HR plays in or their role plays in the business. And often in startups, you know, your main priority is to just basically get demand, get revenue, or get whatever it is. And so HR or these kind of things become a later point, and it's like, oh, we'll solve it later. Whereas when we built the business, you know, myself, Nick, and Vince, I actually have the least amount of business experience across or the rest of them. And so for us, going through this journey was not necessarily a romantic journey where we're like, oh, let's get into the startup world and be founders and be entrepreneurs. Like for us, that just meant, oh, we're going to eat ramen for a while, you know, like it's not ideal, you know. We want to get out of startup world. But so for us, when we built this, it wasn't about let's just go and get as much revenue from day one. We actually held back on our revenue numbers purely so that we can focus on building the business. So getting Marissa in, who's our head of talent, and she looks after from HR and culture element. She was a strategic and a hire that we brought forward because we found that the business was moving at such a pace. Rather than waiting till the business like broke and, you know, we have a exodus of staff or something like that, how do we bring someone in early so we can essentially be proactive about certain problems that may occur? And that's been really helpful. But I'd say, like, from a culture point, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say we have the best culture in the world, you know, like we're still working on it. We're fundamentally just a year old, so we don't necessarily we don't have traditions yet, you know, like it's still too early. But one thing that is super important is that us as founders, we need to be, I guess, we need to understand that the role we play in the business is not a high chair. You know, we don't sit there and go, we're the founders, so you know, you do what we tell or what we say. It's more about we're on this journey together, and forget about my title. Let's just build this together. And I think when you're working on the front line with your team, and you have this element where your team no longer sees you as your boss but sees you as a colleague, it creates this element where people build more trust. And when one person falls a little bit behind, it's not let's forget about them and get rid of the weakest link. It's about no, how do we bring it up so that our weakest link becomes our strongest link? And so that's kind of the I guess culture or values we're trying to foster and create.
I guess one of my biggest lessons on like team and people and culture have been, you know, there's such a big difference when you have someone who's good and is an okay fit in culture versus someone who just fits into the culture so well, and it's like a 10x improvement on just everything. Yeah. And you know, at times it can be really hard to know what that's like until you actually see it. Yeah. And then you try and replicate that.
Correct.
But you know, what is it when you're going through that hiring process, and obviously when you're hiring that quickly, what is it that you look for, and what's the process that you follow to make sure that you get the right person?
It's a good question, and it's evolving. In the beginning, it was more about, does this person have a wow factor? So if I sit in front of this person, have this conversation, am I going to be completely wowed by this person? You know, I ultimately, every time I hire someone, I look at them and kind of go, could this person tell me what to do? And would I sit there and go, this person doesn't know what they're talking about? Or would I go, actually, this person knows 100%? You know, like the team that I'm trying to build, to be honest, is I'm trying to, like, I think I'm already starting to shoot myself in the foot where I'm becoming essentially the weakest link, but everyone around me needs to be better than me at something, you know? And so when I'm speaking to these people, I'm trying to find what it is that they're really wow at, you know, whether it be they're really good at sport or there's, you know, some sort of element. As we've been able to grow, and we're now looking at essentially our value set, you know, and does this person sit into those values, and will they be able to essentially get along with the wider group? You know, I've looked at a few people where I think they'd be really good in the role or great at the role, you know, but we've turned them down because just, you know, we don't think they'd get along. You know, a lot of my hires, if I'm hiring for a team, I'm going to try bring one of the team members into that team, and not necessarily the head of that team, you know, someone that's, you know, maybe mid-level or day-to-day, and get that person to interview that person, because ultimately that's the person that's going to be working with the person the most, and their feedback counts. If their feedback turns around and goes, look, nah, I don't think it's a good fit, I'm not going to sit there and just ignore them. I'm going to listen and go, why is that, you know, and kind of reason and understand. And if their reason is valid, then I'm going to take their, you know, then we say, sorry, no, you know, but if their reason is not valid, then obviously we look at it from other angles. But we have like a 3-step interviewing process. So because we've come from recruitment, it's been a bit easier where we've been a bit more structured and stringent with that. So that's definitely helped.
So for anyone that is going through that process where they're hiring people and don't necessarily come from a HR background, what are some of the things that they should do, or processes that they should follow, or just general kind of structures that they should have when they're going about the hiring process? Yeah,
so I mean, like for example, we'll try to do on the job type tasks. So if it's in marketing, whether it's sales or tech, we'll get them to do an actual live sort of situation. One of the things that we built, and then we've been able to set up time slots which are like slightly off time. So for example, we had a situation where within our tech team, we set up interview times on a Saturday. Now I know Saturdays are very odd, and you know, like a lot of people, essentially that's their outside of work time. But for us, it's super important to understand how much does this person want to actually be here, you know? So we've had people come in on a Saturday, do the interview, and for us, that's already a massive tick, because they've essentially sacrificed something to be there. And so I think it's more about, don't necessarily interview just on a set of questions. Look outside and go, how do they perform in the role? And more importantly, thinking about it, what are they willing to give up to be there with you? Because right now for us, our goal is to be $1 billion business. Everyone, you ask anyone in the team, we know that like if we build a business that's anything shy than $1 billion, then we don't see that as a success. So for us, we need to think as $1 billion business as now. And to get a business is not going to turn into $1 billion business overnight, or it's not going to be an easy journey. It's going to be a horrendous and tough slog. One of our values is grit, and it's for that reason. You're going to have to grit your teeth through certain elements, and that's where, when we're hiring, one of the big things is we need to know that this person is willing to sacrifice. Because if the person isn't willing to sacrifice now, then when the times get tough, what's going to happen, And so I think that's, for a startup, I think that's super important. And I'd say, like, make the interviews difficult and see which ones remain, and don't just hire the first one that comes. Make sure you've done your due diligence, put them through the rounds. If you lose them through another process, you lose them, but at the end of the day, you need to put them through the process.
So I'm really curious about this as well. Like when I think about sort of growing Playbook Media, it's so different to any other business that I've tried to build. The thought process that I go behind it is very different. So I don't have, like, I've never been one to kind of set financial goals, but it's definitely a case of like 3 to 5 years from now, where do I see the business going? And it's changed so much of the way that I approach the short-term thinking of the business, of like how I would normally act, or the decisions that I would make, and things that we kind of do with that. So I'm really curious from that perspective of like, chasing to be $1 billion company and not willing to accept anything less than that. How do you think that has changed your approach to building out Weploy?
It's meant that we've moved slower to move faster, if that makes sense. So we've tried our very best to not cut corners, so that it's essentially, we're building like a very big building or a very big house or whatever it be. When you're building that out, you need to make sure that the foundations are there, right? It's very easy to just start laying bricks and go, let's just design as we go and blah, 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 blah. And it's you be agile and et cetera, et cetera. But you have to also understand that your walls need to be strong, because if your walls aren't strong, a wind's going to come and it's going to collapse. Like for example, earlier this year, we were about to open up into much more states. And what we ended up doing was we stopped that. And it was actually, it was a strategic decision to stop and say, you know what, let's just open these 2 states and really strengthen what we're doing, and sacrifice the revenue that was going to come in. And it was because we needed to move slower to ensure that we move faster. I mean, we've been moving at such an accelerated pace that right now our biggest hindrance is growth, or like our biggest, we always say it internally, which is like our biggest, what can our biggest measure to failure, is right now is if we grow too fast, then our business can our biggest risk is failing is growth. Sorry, finally got it up. So for us, it's making sure that through that growth, we're making measurable growth, and we're not just growing for the sake of growing. We're actually growing in the direction that we want to. And so for that, we have to be diligent and look at where and what we're doing to grow. And if we're going left of field, to just basically nip it in the butt and be honest with ourselves. So, if we start going down a left field and start selling a product or working with something that is just, it's not what we wanted to do, we have to be able to say, you know what, that's not what we want to do, shut it off, and basically be okay to shut off that revenue. And it's sometimes scary, because you see dollar signs, but you have to follow your heart, and you can't follow the dollar signs, because the dollar signs is going to most likely take you somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'm really curious to kind of know your experience with like Saibu as well. But like for me with Stage Label, it always felt like an uphill struggle, and everything was just about how do we get to that next sort of target or next goal, and it was just such a uphill battle. Mm-hmm. With Playbook Media, it's been kind of the complete opposite, and it's almost been a case of like, I know that I'm going to be doing this for 5 years.
Yeah.
So how do I maximize what the outlook looks like in 5 years? Is, as you said, kind of like short term, setting up the structures and the processes, and like being really careful in terms of the clients that we bring on, how we sort of just everything that goes with it changes.
Correct.
And short term, we could be moving a lot faster, revenue could be growing a lot quicker, but it's just making sure that we have those things in place to make sure that we maximize the 5-year thing. Was that a similar experience for you with Saibu, or like was there a very similar sort of mindset?
No, 100%. So anyone that knows me closely will know that I'm a massive jiu-jitsu addict, and
I was about to. So congratulations on getting your brown belt.
Thank you. Yeah, it's still very surreal, but jiu-jitsu really like fundamentally changed the way I look at things. And when I was doing Saibu, I wanted to build a really big business really quickly. And so in jiu-jitsu, the average person takes between 8 to 10 years to get their black belt, sometimes more. And it's this element where like, I think that the statistic is like only 1% of white belts who start will end up with a black belt. And it's because basically people just stop during the process, life gets in the way, whatever. But it's within jiu-jitsu, it doesn't matter. Like I could go tomorrow and put on a black belt, but it doesn't mean I'm a black belt. And if I go out and verse a black belt, that black belt is going to kick my ass. So it's this thing where you have to be honest and know where you stand in the rank, right? When I created Saibu, we started as a white belt, and I wanted to put the black belt on as quick as possible. And that fundamentally just stunted our growth. Whereas when we created Weploy, using the jiu-jitsu analogy of philosophy, I have never doubted, like say in jiu-jitsu, I'd be here today, and much like this, we know that the business we have zero doubt that it's not going to be, we have zero doubt that it's not going to succeed. We know 100% it's going to succeed. It's just a matter of making sure that we take it to that point. And so with that, much like jiu-jitsu, you've just got to rock up every day and keep training. And if you're wearing the white belt, you wear it proud. And when you get to your blue, you wear it proud. You don't try to be something that you're not. And so for us, taking the learnings we had from Saibu, which was all around like, don't try to grow too quick, don't try to whatever. Let's just build in blocks and build very strong foundations so that when you put on that black belt, you could still be wearing a brown belt or a purple belt, but people were going to you and going, hey, you should be wearing that black belt. That's where we want to be.
So I guess like practically speaking, for Playbook Media, that means that like we sometimes turn away clients, and like we did that like 1.5, 2 months into the business, where I had other people going, what the hell are you doing? You're trying to build a business, why are you turning away money? What does that sort of look like practically for Weploy when you talk about sort of building up the structures or building up the walls?
Yeah. So it's things like, for example, turning away clients as well. Yeah. So one of the big things we stand by is unconscious bias, or removing unconscious bias. Actually, most recent one happened about a week and a half ago, but basically there was a job posted and this person wasn't given a fair go. And it's very easy to point the finger at the job seeker, or what we call the Weployee, and say, this person didn't do a good job, get them off the platform, and sorry Mr. Client, let me help you, blah 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 blah. But in our case, we turned around and said, actually, is it the job seeker's fault, or is it a bit about the Weployer or the business there? So when we looked at it, and in this case, particular case, this person was basically accused of having poor communication skills. And we're like, well, this is going to be pretty easy to figure out. We phoned this Weployer up and just basically spoke to her and just said, hey, just had a conversation, and wanted to see that, and I think 3 people called her just to see, 3 people's different opinions on her communication skills, and everyone turned around and said, she's fine. We had a very normal conversation. She's got an accent, but that does not mean she cannot communicate. And so for us, it was quite simple. Basically that sort of bias situation, we're not going to accept that. Now this business, we've basically said, look, sorry, we don't want to work with you anymore. It's a pretty big business, but and can bring in a lot of revenue for us and get us to our goals quicker. But at the end of the day, we're not going to build a business that basically sells out our morals. We're going to build a business with the right morals, values, and processes. And if it means that we say no to some revenue now, we say no to some revenue. So practically, that's an example. Yeah.
I was going to ask you something, now I've completely forgotten. I'm going to edit that. I have to edit this bit out. So you spoke earlier about your love of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And the commitment and dedication that's kind of needed to get to that stage. And you've spoken also about some of the things that have taught you, but I'm wondering whether there were any sort of like practical lessons that you've taken from jiu-jitsu that you've applied into your businesses.
Yeah, heaps. I'm just trying to think which ones, because you've got me on a conversation where I can talk about it for days. Sorry, you going to say something?
So I was just going to say, I think there's just so many different like parallels in life when you go through things. So like my background was like I wanted to be a professional cricketer growing up, and like the whole, you talk about sacrificing for people, like if you really wanted to achieve something, there's a certain level of sacrifice that you have to go through. And like my cricket career didn't work out because of knee injuries and all of those things. But I feel like a lot of the lessons that I picked up aren't directly applicable to running a business, but there's just so much that translates and taught me about myself more than anything else. So just always curious to know like what that's like in a similar setting for different people.
Yeah, I think in this case, I'm going to try to stick this to one, because there's a few, but like ego and humility is a huge thing that I've been able to really take away from jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is this art whereby I've seen, a girl that's 45 kilos choke out someone, a male that's 120 kilos, and with ease, and it's not a matter of strength, it's a matter of technique and process and refinement, et cetera, and you're constantly reminded that there are so much more people that are better than you. And if you walk in with this false sense of security or false sense of confidence or an egotistical view, in jiu-jitsu, you're going to get choked out pretty quickly. And that's just how it is. In jiu-jitsu, it doesn't matter how much money you've got. It doesn't matter what you have outside of jiu-jitsu. When you step on that mat, at the end of the day, you're there to defend yourself, and your skills are going to do its own talking. And so in Weploy and in everything else, what we're looking to do, or what we really focus on doing is that same sort of learning, where it's like we are not nowhere near the biggest and best company right now. We've got a long way to go. People always go, oh, Weploy is going great, and it is going great, but from what we want it to be, there's still a very far way to go, and we have to be honest with that and honest with ourselves. So even within the business, I've had, going back to what we talked a little bit earlier about giving people the trust to be able to kind of sit there and let them explain and show their ideas, and I guess listen to it with an unego sort of way. Doesn't matter if this person is the most junior person, they're speaking up for a reason, and you have to listen, you have to hear, and you have to assess it and why. So with Weploy, we wouldn't have been able to grow this fast or have the success we've had so far if we as the leaders of the business fundamentally didn't listen to our staff. And that's where in jiu-jitsu, going back to it, I wouldn't be here today or be in jiu-jitsu if I wasn't able to listen to my teammates, whether it be at a tournament or whatever, coaching me. It's this thing where together we build together, and very similar to Weploy. It's like I would not be here without the team that I have around me, and so that's I think that's probably the biggest one that I've learned so far, or translates. Yeah,
like speaking of that kind of like that trust, that listening, and that introspection that you've touched on a few times as well. It's really interesting. Like I think the example that you mentioned of that case where you had a client who was unhappy with the Weploy, and you did your research and all of those things. Like I think more often than not, when you're running a startup, it's not so much that other people are working for you, but you're working for everyone else.
Yeah.
And every single mistake that happens is your fault.
Yeah.
Right. Like even if so. Like I've made mistakes where I've hired the wrong person and they haven't executed, and it's been a terrible outcome for our client, but that isn't their fault. Like I've hired the wrong person, or I haven't gone through that process at all. What are your kind of like your own personal sort of checks and balances, and how do you keep that sort of mindset going?
In a sense of
In the sense of, I guess from what you were saying earlier about like making sure that you hire people that have that wow factor and are kind of smarter than you, or have something that's better than you. Obviously, one of the biggest challenges for startups growing is hiring the right sort of people as well. So how do you sort of maintain that? Like obviously at the start you've got so much room and so much room for growth, and you're attracting a particular type of person, but that evolves over time.
Yeah. It's for me. I check in with my team. If I bring in my team member or colleague into that interview and get them to listen and get them to ask questions and et cetera, and afterwards I'll ask them what did they think, and if we're on the same page, then great. If we're not on the same page, I'm going to find out why, and see, why we are, and is it reasonable? But really, my team is my check. I have to listen to my team. I have full trust in my team, and that's the thing where, like, for me, it's much more easier to make decisions because the decision isn't just about me; it's about the rest of the team. We're all making the same decision together. So that's for me. They're definitely my check.
So what does the next 2, 3, 4, 5+ years look like for Weploy?
Growth, a lot of growth. Growth is our biggest mandate right now. Now that we've built the strong walls, built the right foundations, we've got the right people in our team, we just want to grow this baby as big as possible. Our investor had one condition, which was it has to be global. And for us, we agree. So right now it's all about building this business, getting Australia set, and then being able to move into international waters and just take on the world and really bring, I guess, disruption to the industry. For us, we've just actually redone and reset our why statement, and it's to create a fearless and empowered future of work whereby people can live to work rather than work to live. And so for us, in let's say 5, 6, 7 years, for me even personally, what I'd love to see is that people using Weploy as essentially an international passport where people can follow their dreams. So if I want to become a jiu-jitsu champion and I need to go to LA to train with some of the guys over there, I can jump on a plane and then jump off that plane, turn on my app, all of a sudden start accepting jobs when I'm not training and get some extra cash and then go and train and go and be a world champion. So for me, or for us, that's what we're trying to create, and that's what we see as the future ahead of us.
Very, very exciting. So part of why I created this Hustle podcast segment was to check in with really interesting startups that are growing super quickly as a reflection on what's kind of happened to date, with the view to bringing you back in 2 to 3 years and seeing how things have progressed. So really, really excited to follow your journey and bring you back at some point and hear how things are going. But Tony, the last thing with this segment as well, that I wanted to do something a little bit different, was to help connect the dots between some of the startups in the ecosystem and people that are coming on the show and the people that are listening at home. So if there is one thing that you can ask for that people that are listening to this episode right now can help you with, what would that be?
If there's any businesses that require short-term staffing, require or are looking to outsource staff, admin staff, customer service staff, need receptionists on call, those kind of things, please reach out or spread the word and just refer us. That's the biggest thing. The more businesses that can use our platform, the better.
Fantastic. Tony, thanks for coming on the show. For anyone that wants to say hello, find out more, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn, so Tony Wu on LinkedIn. Otherwise, email me directly, tony@weployapp.com. I'm not on Twitter, so those are the two main parts. Yeah,
you should get on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm really scared to get on Twitter because I did a little while back, and then I just basically wouldn't stop spending my time on Twitter. So I've taken myself off it. But direct email me, absolutely fine.
Awesome. I'll make sure those links are in the show notes. Once again, Tony, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to episode 6 of the Startup Playbook Hustle. You can find the show notes of my interview with Tony, along with a curated list of tools and resources for startup founders at startupplaybook.co. As always, you can join the conversation through our Twitter account. The handle is @PlaybookStartup. Want to feature on the Startup Playbook Hustle? Shoot me an email at rohit@startupplaybook.co or fill out the form linked onto the show notes available at our website. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back in 2 weeks. But in the meantime, hope you all have a wonderful holiday period and come back ready for a huge 2018.